おっぱい吸わせてやるからよ。口もっとしゃぶらせろ。
Alright, I know what we're all thinking. What type of narrative context could ever save an anime from this? Like, what am I even reading? You know, it'd be one thing if it came from Gojo. All praise Gojo cause he's the best. But it's coming from this down-horrendous ghost hag with Makima eyes, who's apparently thirsty for Dollar Tree McLovins. But that's just the icing on the cake. Because on the other side of the paranormal, you got these aliens who are obsessed with reproduction because they gotta sustain their species somehow. So they take a page out of the P. Diddler handbook until they get decimated by psychic powers. Shout out to Momo. Then the male protagonist loses his manhood and family jewels to a ghost, so he teams up with the female protagonist to save the Soul Society or something like that. You know, it's all pretty normal stuff. It's a classic shonen. Kind of. Not really at all. Yes, this is the beautiful madness of Dandadan, an anime that within its first week of releasing has already blown away every expectation and standard for a shonen series. And with all these wacky out-of-pocket plot twists and unconventional methods of telling this story, some of you guys might have asked yourselves, what is this anime even about? I mean, even the name Dandadan is one giant question. Like, is it a sound effect? Is it a type of alien? Like, what is going on here? So for all you legends, people of culture, and mad lad chats who wish to find out all these answers, drink some water, touch some grass, and let's dive into the masterclass that is Dandadan.
A lot of stars, you should see the constellation. A little punk, I sit alone with contemplation. How can I get it? I'm looking for a correlation. My heart is pounding, I'm working towards my coronation.
Now, in its basic form, Dandadan is about a boy with paranormal abilities and a girl with psychic powers, teaming up to fight against ghosts, aliens, and other supernatural threats that threaten the world that they live in. Starting from the perspective of the female protagonist Momo, we begin the journey with her getting dumped by her boyfriend in a very amicable fashion. She definitely did not kick him in the face or anything. She's pretty upset and understandably depressed, expressing how she'll never meet a hard-boiled guy like her idol, Kentakakura. So she wanders around the school until she stumbles upon a class where this nerdy guy is getting bullied for his interests in the occult. Momo intervenes, she shuts the bullies down and quickly departs, and the boy, moved by this moment, follows after her, convinced that the reason why Momo stood up for him was because she also believes in aliens like him and wants to be his friend. Sadly, neither are the case, and she kinda shits all over his interests. But feeling that she crossed a line, she apologizes and reveals that even though she doesn't believe in aliens, she does believe in spirits. And then he does the same thing that she did to him. It's pretty funny. So to prove the other wrong, they each investigate various rumored areas pertaining to ghosts and aliens, and lo and behold, they're both right. So by a twist of fate, it's actually these crazy turn of events that thrust them into the supernatural world and bonding them together. And once Momo finds out that Okarun's real name is Kentakakura, even accidentally quoting the exact same lines and replicating that same awkward disposition of her idol, that sparks the beginning of their romance and the heart of what Dandadan is truly about. Now, the main goal for Momo is to develop these powers that she's awakened to, and do her best to save and protect the people that she can, because she can't just sit still and watch others suffer, she has to intervene. As for the male protagonist Okarun, his goal is to retrieve his lost private parts after it was taken by a ghost so he can regain his manhood. Yes, this is an actual part of the plot that has massive repercussions down the line. Like, you thought Denji was based because he's inspired to be this top-tier gooner, well, Dandadan is just as weird. And perhaps it's even more over the top because the essence of this anime hinges on its creative freedom. You see, Dandadan, in comparison to many of its contemporaries, is one of those series that breaks the mold from the standards set by its predecessors. Now, that's not to say that it completely reinvents the wheel, but there isn't anything that I've read or watched that gave me the same feelings I feel when I'm reading Dandadan. The tone of this narrative, maybe even the actual story it's trying to convey centering around this relationship between Momo and Okarun, is what really distinguishes this series as its completely own thing. With Okarun being this pretty lonely and awkward guy trying to find his place in the world, and although that isn't anything crazy or different, in the context of how that serves with his dynamic with Momo, his flaws and imperfections kind of shine like gold. He brings out these characteristics within Momo that showcase her strength and resilience in the face of these chaotic forces affecting them, standing against those things that try to harm her friends and family. They aren't really heroes, they're not trying to be martyrs, they're just people going about their lives, which makes this story much more grounded in reality. Over the past few years, we've been bombarded with these exceptionally dark and bleak stories like your Jujutsu Kaisens, your Hell's Paradises, and your Chainsaw Mans. And while those dark themes are also pretty relevant in Dandadan, it takes a much more lighthearted approach when it tackles the mature subject matter. Like, there is nothing this series won't cover because it doesn't really have a filter. I think that's part of the charming aesthetic. It's a story that pushes the boundaries. It isn't afraid to show those things that are weird or creepy. It can be hilarious when it wants to be, sad and depressing when it chooses, and even heartwarming. And not to mention that it has a romance setting between Momo and Okarun that often feels more genuine and real than most romance anime. I think that's what makes Dandadan so revolutionary. It's not just about one thing, it's about everything. You want your action, you got your action. You want your love, you got your love. You want your S-tier waifu manifested in the goddess form of Granny Psycho? Well, too bad, that's my wife, and none of you guys are invited to the wedding. Dandadan is just a breath of fresh air. It doesn't adhere to those trends that made its predecessors so successful. There isn't any larger-than-life dreams like Luffy wanting to become the Pirate King, or Naruto wanting to become Hokage. There really isn't any fodder like hollows or curses. There's no tournament arcs, rescue arcs, or anything like that. There isn't a need for a class system to tell you how strong an enemy is. The main focus is simply chaos and freedom. That's why there's no need for those Aizen-level manipulators pulling the strings with their puppet villains whose only purpose is to make the protagonist stronger, because it just isn't necessary. Every antagonist feels like these real forces that could cause serious harm to the main characters. The designs are awesome, the fights are intriguing and well scripted, and the anime's taking all of this and kicking it up to Wumbo. On top of that, we just get some absolutely glorious facial expressions, like they're so exaggerated and ridiculous, I just love it. But in essence, Dandadan takes every shonen trope and just chucks it out the window. With a lot of other anime, usually I can make predictions or theories of where the story is headed. For example, in something like Jujutsu Kaisen, with the way certain events transpire, or even battles like Gojo vs Sukuna, you could see Gojo losing. The writing was on the wall. But when it comes to Dandadan, you really have no idea which direction the story is going to go. And I'd say that's more of a good thing than a bad thing, cause it makes every conflict or interaction feel like something entirely different. I think sometimes the arcs can come off as these episodic adventures, where slowly the cast of characters builds up until we got all our protagonists on the front lines, running the show and doing their thing. But I think that's mainly due to the bizarre courses and routes the narrative takes that subvert the normal, because Dandadan doesn't hold back its punches. It will let it be itself and run wild and go crazy. The chaos is part of the fun. And while all this insane stuff goes on in the background, the core of Dandadan fixates on this dynamic between Momo and Okarun, who are bonded together by the supernatural and finding those missing pieces to themselves that make them whole. The humor is absurd but great. It doesn't rely on simple gags that cheapen the characters. It's genuine, authentic to the story, and nothing is off the table. It brings up these dark themes which are often easy to digest and sometimes strangely relatable, and then amps it up with its own innate lunacy. It really plays it up too, because at the beginning of the series, first Okarun loses his banana, then once he gets it back, he loses his family jewels, which are depicted as gold balls of spirit energy. And that's because in Japanese, the direct translation for his manhood is Gintama, which means gold ball. This was actually something I learned from Gintama, because for an entire arc, the show was rebranded to Gintama because Gintoki was up against his rival Kintoki, who basically stole the show. But yeah, for like Okarun, this is a pretty serious situation. And Dandadan is not afraid to make a joke out of it, and still keeping the integrity and severity of the situation all intact, which is pretty hard to do. Now, there's been some pushback on Dandadan for the graphic content displayed in the series, and while it gets toned down later on, these elements are always going to be there. It's part of the show, it's part of the story. But the unsettling nature of these scenes are intended to make you feel uncomfortable. It's creepy and disturbing, and it sets the tone for what this anime and manga is about in regards to the paranormal. Dandadan balances these mature topics of growing up with horrific violence, supernatural terror, and horrible tragedies that affect their characters. But in contrast to series like JJK or Chainsaw Man that are exceptionally bleak, Dandadan takes this optimistic approach, using this outrageous comedy as a mechanism to tell this crazy story without getting lost in translation. The point is, Dandadan is kind of about everything. It's a coming-of-age story that breaks down the absurdities of the world, and highlighting that sometimes reality is truly stranger than fiction. And I think it's those attributes that will make it an extremely successful anime going forward, especially with how outlandish it can be sometimes. If you haven't checked it out yet, well, this is your sign to do so. And with that, I'll catch you guys in the next video.